back to another episode of the Open Source Cafe. Today we have Assaf joining us from Livecycle, and we're going to talk about developers. We're going to talk about preview environments and all sorts of things. Open source, you know the drill. So before we get started, Assaf, would you like to give yourself a quick intro?
Yeah, sure. Hi, my name is Assaf. I'm a developer. I've been doing that professionally for the last 10 years and not professionally even more. Used to work at Checkpoint, Microsoft, Saludo, and in the last 3 years, I founded together with my two friends a company called Livecycle, which our task is to provision preview environments to help collaboration inside the development workflow. So I've been VP R&D of that company in the last 3 years. And yeah, basically that's it.
Amazing, and that's what we're talking about today. I've done a lot of stuff with like for developers. As you know, I often teach Kubernetes, and I get some requests like I'm a developer. It's very difficult for me. I don't want to be working with all these tools and stuff like that. Um, so preview environments. Let's talk about that. Before I jump into like some of the more detailed questions, can you maybe share with the audience who might not be familiar what are preview environments and how can developers specifically benefit from using those in their development process?
Yeah, sure. So usually when we talk about environments are basically a cluster of services that represent some application, right? And the most common environment perhaps is the production environment, which is the product itself that users have access to. For example, when you go to twitter.com, this is the actual production environment. Another common environment type is the local environment. This is the kind of environment developers use to develop and code the application on their local machine. So basically, like for example, if you develop a front-end application, you might use some local web server like Webpack or something, and you'll run in your computer yarn or node or npm space start, and it will boot up a local development environment. It also might include other services like a backend, a database, and so on. So those are kinds of environment. We also have staging environment, which is also another kind of static environment, meaning it's like a singleton. You have one of these, like the production one. So basically, staging is the clone of production used for internal testing before you ship to production. So when we talk about preview environments, they differ from those environments I just mentioned by the fact that they have a more ephemeral nature to them, meaning you can spin up a lot of them and you can do it in parallel, and you want them to be relatively cheap and fast, so you can do many of them in parallel. So preview environments, usually in the development cycle, they live in the development phase before you push code into the main branch of your code. So if we talk about the Git workflow, usually you have a branch and you push commits to that branch, and when you're ready, you do a review. You want to merge that branch into the main branch. So this is the space where preview environments live. Basically, for every branch in your development team and every commit, you will spin up a preview environment. And those kind of environments are used for usually review. And for example, if you have the local environment we mentioned before, it's used for the developer to see what they do on their computer. The preview environments can be shared. They have a public URL. You can share that URL with other teammates, maybe even other stakeholders, which are non-developers, so they can't spin up a development environment on their computer. So this is basically the rough definition of preview environments.
Nice, and well, thanks for sharing, Asaf. And I know we had a good conversation the other day in the Twitter space. So if you want to learn more about more specific questions around preview environments, you can check the recording out for that. It can be found on my channel soon. But let's talk a bit about preview environments in the context of like Preevy. So first, can you maybe explain a bit about how Preevy works and how it simplifies the creation of ephemeral preview environments?
Right. So Preevy is an open source tool we developed here at Livecycle. It's also open source, so the community can obviously contribute, and we will very much be grateful for that. And what Preevy does, um, it's based on Docker Compose. So it takes a Docker Compose configuration, and basically it spins it up in the cloud on the user's behalf. So it doesn't have its own cloud, it uses the user's cloud. For example, if you use Google or Civo or Azure or anything else. And it takes that Docker Compose, basically spin up a virtual machine in the cloud, run the Docker Compose inside it, and every service inside the Docker Compose configuration will have a unique URL, which is shareable across the internet. And that URL also is automatically has security features like HTTPS out of the box. And we also have, on top of that, more security features like a private key you can use, or even in our SaaS solution, you can use SSO for social logins, such as your organization's internal login. So Preevy basically solved the problem of having to deal with all of the configuration of the VM, passing the Docker context, making sure it has HTTPS, the tunneling, which makes sure you have a public URL for that, and the security features I just mentioned. Additionally, what we're working on now is we're adding collaboration features inside those environments. And basically it means that when you go into one of those public URLs, you would have a widget inside, which we inject. It's like a piece of front-end code that you can open a chat box like Slack inside the environment, so you have contextual feedback inside. And we have more features like screenshotting, video recording, and integration with your source control manager, like GitHub or GitLab. So this is, in a nutshell, this is Preevy. And yeah, you can check it out on github.com/livecycle/Preevy, Preevy.
Yeah, and I'll leave all the links in the description below. Thanks for sharing about, that's what the audience is mainly interested about, like what are some of the pain points and challenges of the developers that they commonly face before the existence of Preevy. Being an open source project, 100% you can contribute, you can get involved in the community, and yeah, check out the links in the description. All right, I was checking out the repository, and it mentions that Preevy integrates with Docker Compose applications. So can you maybe share why is this integration like crucial for its functionality?
Yeah, so the reason we chose Docker Compose is we did some research. We did a lot of research, actually, by interviewing many companies and also looking at data sources online, like open source repository. And we saw that Docker Compose is basically kind of the standard for defining local development environments, meaning that many companies and open source repos, they use Docker Compose to define their development workflow. So let's say you have an application that has like a front end, let's maybe say a DB like MongoDB, and 3 backend services, which can be any language you want. With Docker Compose, you can define all of those services, and you can define the relationship between them. So each service can communicate with one another. And to boot it up, on the developer need to run a command line like docker space compose space up, and that's it. So since companies and repos already have that definition, it's easy for them, using a tool like Preevy, to take that configuration and ship it in the cloud. So instead of running Docker space compose space up, you would run Preevy space up, and the same kind of machine would spin up, but now now they will reside in the cloud. So when you turn off your computer, they still live on. And additionally, you'll have the public URLs, as we mentioned before. So you can use Preevy to spin up Preevy environments in your development workflow, in your CI. For example, whenever you push a commit into your feature branch, you would have the environments updated with the code you just pushed, and you can share that across your team to enable faster development cycles. Yeah, so
Cool. Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. And I was also looking on again, while I was going through the page, and someone asked this in the Twitter space as well. It supports, it mentioned that Privy supports like Lightsail and Google Cloud VMs. So do you have any additional plans for supporting additional cloud providers in the near future?
yeah, so we are looking into other cloud providers such as Civo and maybe Fly.io and so on, because they have many interesting features which you can maybe boot them up even faster. Specifically, even now you can use those clouds if you use Kubernetes, because we recently added a feature that Preevy can run on top of Kubernetes. The way it works is basically we spin up a pod. In the pod, we make sure there is Docker inside, and that Docker runs our Docker Compose file. So basically, it's Docker inside Docker, Docker in Docker. And all you have to do is to get your Kubernetes context and the credentials. And the same way you would run your kubectl commands, Preevy would do the same. So if you use, even now, if you use any other cloud providers that, like Civo, that has Kubernetes inside, you can still use Preevy. But we do plan to support more VMs that are not Kubernetes in the future.
Yeah, that was one of the like a lot of people ask that question in the Twitter space, so it's nice to see that. And for updates, you can go follow Livecycle and join the community, and you'll be updated. Right. So when we're talking about like let's say security, it's always a concern when dealing with cloud-based environments. So how does Preview address security concerns in the creation and management of Preview environments?
Right. So first of all, Preevy doesn't host the VMs. It uses the user's cloud credentials to host the VMs inside the user's cloud. So in that sense, we don't have access to the actual application that run. Additionally, we don't have access to the code. The code always is being accessed using the user's credentials, whether it's local on the machine or is it using the CI. It has code access to their public repository or private repository, doesn't matter, inside the source control provider like GitHub. So in that sense, everything stays within the project itself. Additionally, since we create public URLs, sometimes you also want to secure those URLs. So as I mentioned before, first of all, those URLs are already come out of the box without any configuration with HTTPS. Additionally, we have features for sharing those environments only with people that have the key. So we provide authentication. We have two kinds of authentication. We have a simple authentication, which is available in the open source, that uses a private key that we use for the tunneling to create a unique password, which you can share with your teammates, and only then they can access the environment. And if you use our SaaS We also have additional features that coming in the near future for using SSO single sign-on and using social login, basically using your organization authentication. So it's even more convenient and secure.
Amazing. Well, thanks for sharing, Asaf. And one question you get when you talk about ephemeral environments is that they are known for their temporary nature. So how does Preevy handle like the life cycle of these environments? And can users maybe like control the expiration or the deletion? Yeah.
Yeah, great question. So Preevy can basically, it's designed to run inside your CI, like GitHub Action or Circle CI or any other CI. And we even went ahead and developed ourselves the GitHub Action for spinning up environments. We also have a Circle CI orb, which is um, it's their definition for GitHub Action, the parallel feature. And basically, the way it works is for every commit, you would run Preevy up, which would spin up your environment. In It will either spin up a new VM or use the existing one. So in the first time you create a new branch, it will create a VM, and every new push, it will update the same VM. And whenever you close your branch, whenever you merge it to your main branch, you would run Preevy down, which would spin down this VM and will save you resources. So again, the way it works is basically for every branch you spin up a new VM, you update it for every commit, and then you spin it down whenever that branch is merged to the main branch. So the VM lives basically the same amount of time that the branch lives. So you only utilize the resources for that amount of time. And again, like you mentioned before, we encourage using very cheap and light VMs like Livecycle for AWS. So because of the nature of those environments, because they're Preevy environments, they are much more simple than production or staging environments. So you can actually uh, utilize those cheaper and smaller VMs to reach that goal.
Amazing. Yep. Thanks for answering the questions, Asaf. One more thing I want to ask from your experiences, like, have you seen any common misconceptions or myths about preview environments? And maybe you can share how Preevy dispels them.
Sure. Common misconception or myths. One common myth is that Preevy environments, they need to be like a copy of the production environment, and they need to use the same configurations, which are most of the times really, really complex. Many cases, they involve a dedicated team or even a group of developers that their main job is maintaining those environments and adding more features to them. So they are very complex. Not everyone can know how to spin them up and use them. Um, Preview environments, they are more like local environments, maybe somewhere between those local environments and those production environments, meaning they are much more simple. They usually a vertical slice of your application. So, for example, your application might consist of hundreds of services, but you are only focusing right now as a developer on like 3 or 4 services. So the only services you need to spin up to test your current feature is just those services. You don't need to create um, the entire production environment. You only need to create a small amount of them that is necessary for you to see what you're working on. Also, you don't have to clone the entire production data. You can use a small slice of that. You can use data seeding or create a mock server and replace the data entirely with a mock API. So this is a common myth that you have to use very complex configuration, but in reality, they more like local environment that are designed to be used by many different developers and to be easily configured.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Asaf. I had the same thought in mind, and a follow up on the misconceptions can be, you mentioned about developers. So can we say that another misconception might be that it's only for developers? Because although developers primarily use the preview environments, but it can be valuable to like QA testers and product managers and even like end users to provide feedback and stuff like that. And speaking of which, um, let's say someone is using preview environments exclusively for like testing new features, which is like the primary purpose, for example. But can it also be used in other tasks, like you test your system updates, performance improvements, security fixes, all sorts of things? So
Yeah. So those are basically two questions, which are both great questions. So I'll start with the first one. So yeah, preview environments, we at Livecycle, one of the thing that separates us from other maybe solutions inside that realm of products, we focus on collaboration. And not only dev to dev collaboration, which you mentioned before, we also want to share those environments with other stakeholders, such as designers and product managers. So basically, for them, it's really a game changer because developers, even if they don't have preview environments, they can, if they want, they can download the feature branch, pull it, and then run it inside their computer. It might be a hassle and it might take a while, but it can be done. Other stakeholders, they don't even have any ability for that. They need to either wait until the code is merged and inside a staging environment, or they need to walk to the actual developer's personal computer and ask them to show them what they're working on. In either case, it's not convenient, and it's very, for them, it doesn't allow them to do their job in the best way possible, in an independent way. They are very dependent on other people. With preview environments, now for them, for every change and every time a developer is ready for a review, they now have a public URL which they can access and actually review and test their work. For example, if a designer designed some new feature or change the design of an existing feature, they can actually see that before it's merged to staging, meaning they can give their comments and their feedback before you need to merge it, because if you do it after that, you need to redo the process of open a branch, change the code, ask for a code review, pass the tests, and so on, which takes a lot of time. The same goes for product managers. If they, for example, designed a new feature flow or maybe analytics and so on, they can actually review it way earlier in the development cycle, which is a game changer for those kind of stakeholders. As for your other question, which was if you can use preview environments for other tasks other than collaboration, then the answer is yes. Those environments are basically live environments. They run the actual code of your application. So they can be used, for example, for end-to-end tests like behavior tests. You can run inside your CI a browser and run all of your Puppeteer or Playwright tests. You can use them for performance testing, for sure. So you can use all the same environments. You can utilize them for many different things.
thanks. Well, thanks for answering the question, Asaf. One last follow up on this topic is, since we're talking about testing, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think that preview environments can replace your like proper testing? So can it be a substitute of for like thorough testing practices, or should they like complement some well-defined testing processes like unit testing, integration, and regression testing?
Yeah. So when speaking about testing, preview environments can actually used for testing stuff like behavior tests. Unit tests, usually they don't need an environment. You can run them without using an environment, just run the unit test itself. But for end-to-end tests or behavior tests, you can use those environments to load up the application and actually make an application that interact with the application as a user would do. So those kind of tests are really really good to be used with Preevy environments. Other kind of tests like A/B tests, they don't Preevy environments aren't very good for them because those kind of tests are more for user testings, and those environments aren't made to be used by users. They're more to be used by the internal team of the development. So when speaking about basically the most suitable tests for to be used with Preevy environments are behavior and end-to-end tests, where you need a running application to test the thing on.
Nice. Thanks for answering my questions, Asaf. And yeah, those were all the questions I had. Thanks a lot for joining us. My one last question is like, what steps would you recommend for someone, let's say, who wants to get started with Preevy environments or like Preevy today? And I'll leave all the links in the description below. So if you want to have any last uh, action items for folks who are watching this.
So if you have a Docker Compose configuration, it's really, really easy using Preevy. You only basically need to you need two things. You need to have access to your cloud, to any cloud provider, any of the big three, or any Kubernetes cluster. If you have this and you have a Docker Compose configuration, it will take you a few minutes. You just replace Docker Compose app with Preevy app, and you would have your Preevy environment. Once you play with it and see it works, you can go ahead and implement that inside your CI job using either one of our own jobs that we wrote inside Livecycle in GitHub or Circle, or you can write your own. Obviously, it's just a CLI. You can run it inside any Linux or Linux-like computer. And we are always happy to help. We have a Slack channel which you can join. We are very communicative there. We would like to hear your feedback, your issues, your bugs, or your complaints. Anything would make us really happy. And we have our open source GitHub repository. You can create issues. You can contribute if you want. We also have our documentation site, which we always try to improve and add new topics and articles. And yeah, you can check out, we have many blog posts inside our websites and many interesting content we create. And you can always just hit me up on Twitter or send me an email, or any other person in the company. Everybody would happy to help.
Yeah, that's the beauty of open source collaboration and community. Thanks a lot for sharing us up. And for folks who want to continue the conversation, get involved in the community, use Livecycle and Preevy, check out all the links in the description below. And we'll see you in the next one. Have a great day. Bye.
Bye. Thanks.